Hello everyone, greetings from the Servant of Nero, AJ here, with another installment of the Faction Overview series, covering the Children of the Divine Court and those of the Great Fathers, otherwise known as the Retribution of Scyrah and the Rhulic aspect of the Mercenaries. The Retribution of Scyrah is a bit of a contentious label because it's essentially synonymous with the armed forces, official and otherwise, of the Iosan kingdom as a whole, at least as far as the player base is concerned. However, in world, the two are very distinct from each other, for all their common facets. The faction was named as such to demonstrate the incremental nature by which Ios came to be involved in the conflicts of wider Imoran, even if this isn't reflected particularly well in game. Rhul, on the other hand, is nice and straightforward. The land of Imoran's dwarves and their ogrun buddies. Their soldiers often act as mercenaries for the southern powers, and fight for their clans and country if the situation calls for it, so nothing fancy. In any event, ogrun aside, this accounts for the two oldest civilized races of Imoran, but while one is markedly older, the other has been settled and established for longer. Ios is the successor to the Empire of Laios, the first civilization in Imoran, which was destroyed as a result of the Cataclysm. Unable to migrate east because of the great abyss that the catastrophe created, the elves ventured to the enclosed wilderness to the northwest of what little was left of the empire. When Ios was settled, each of the Divine Court took a region in which to establish their fane, or high temple as humans would know them. Around these fanes were built the main cities of the Iosan people, which became the capitals of the 8 ethos of Ios, each taking their name from their patron god or goddess. As the city of the fane of the Narcissa of the Divine Court, Shir became the capital of the nation as a whole by default. For the better part of 3 millennia, the Divine Court resided in Ios, alongside their worshippers, but some time after their departure, the Rivening occurred, sending most of their priests insane, the cause of which was unknown at the time. With the rise of human magic, though, coupled with the return of Scyrah, a vengeful and zealous sect among her worshippers arose, blaming human arcanists for their goddess's weakened state. This was the Retribution of Scyrah, and their views and actions quickly had their organization and activities declared illegal by the Halatir under pressure from the conservative fane of Scyrah. But events drove the Halatir and the Retribution into alliance, namely the War of the Houses and the greater enemy that was Gorshade the Bastard of House Vire. This war and the turmoil it caused led to the complete cessation of diplomacy between Ios and the rest of Western Imoran. Thanks to this, in the aftermath of the war, increasingly overt support for the Retribution among the noble houses of Ios, especially Nayar and Shail, made their status as outlaws little more than a point of procedure amidst continued political strife. The jostling of the houses did not aid matters as the Iosan nobility struggled to stabilize itself amongst the activities of the Retribution, the resurgence of the maligned House Fire, and growing Iosan involvement in the world's conflicts as they searched for their missing deities. And while their lack of legal status was revoked with great reluctance, the Retribution are as much a part of the Iosan military apparatus as the nation's standing forces, with additional, more covert uses as well. The core part of the Retribution of Scyrah's assets are the mage hunters, whose beliefs in the guilt of human magic add strength to their ability in combat, ignoring defensive wards through sheer force of will. Everything they do has the sole purpose of killing human arcanists, even if it means befriending them to find greater concentrations of such individuals, caring little for collateral damage or the effect on witnesses. With very few exceptions, the mage hunters are a dour and fervent group, determined in their course and convinced of its righteousness. Recently, however, while their allies among the regular Iosan military are many, the few who have come to share their beliefs have grown in number, contributing to the openness with which the Halatir conducts its dealings with the Retribution. As would be expected of such an organization, though, the mage hunter component of the Retribution doesn't have a formal hierarchy despite its size, separated simply into 3 strata, consisting of its leaders, which includes members of the 9 voices of the Retribution, the strike force commanders, and the mage hunters in the field. Naturally, there are facilities where new zealots are trained and assigned to cells upon assessment as being fit for field duty. The Home Guard Coalition, manned by the regular House Guard troops, could not be more different. This is the regular Iosan military, and each noble house has militias contributing to garrison duties and the armies sent abroad. This especially applies to the 5 great military houses, who contribute the largest bodies of soldiers and are tasked with guarding the key gates that defend the nation. Fully 1/3 of the Home Guard Coalition has been incorporated into the Retribution of Scyrah's 3 armies, with more joining as noble houses look to join their cause. The forces of the House Guard itself are very similar to their human counterparts, with the same sort of organisation, albeit with an officered structure the Iosans can call their own, and a scale of numbers that matches their lower population. Conventional platoons and companies are led by lieutenants and captains in direct overlap with human nomenclature, but company command may also fall to thanes. The nature of the House Guard's cooperation with the decidedly irregular mage hunters, though, gave rise to mixed companies drawing resources from several branches of the Iosan military, and these can be led by captains, thanes, or even sayers. And because the Iosan army was only recently committed to military efforts wholesale, organisation was generally fairly loose, based more on assembling companies for operational task forces rather than assigning fixed corps to particular war efforts. Task forces are commanded by sayers for the most part, aided by thanes depending on the number of companies the task force disposes of. In turn, a task force draws all its assets from a parent army, which is itself composed of 3 divisions based on function. These divisions are the Vanguard, Line, and Special Operations divisions, primarily containing Dawn Guard, House Guard, and Mage Hunters respectively. The Dawn Guard are often accompanied by battle mages from House Shail and their vassals. However, all divisions, which are commanded by Essirs, are supported by the distinct Iosan warjacks, with heavy Myrmidons backing up the Dawn Guard and light Myrmidons spread amongst the House Guard companies. Myrmidon support is provided to the Mage Hunters based on availability and necessity, as their plans typically call for speed, stealth, and rapid decision-making. The parent armies, of which there are 3, are nominally commanded by officers of Arzir rank, but here chain of command becomes a little unclear, as many senior ranks are held within an individual house's militia as opposed to the nation's army. As a result, the ranks of Arzir and Incisar are more relevant within the houses. Incisar is typically the dignity, rather than rank, given to a house militia's overall commander, most often a member of the ruling noble family. Meanwhile, House Nayar and its ubiquitous Dawn Guard have an exclusive use of the rank of Dawn Lord, which is commonly equated to Arzir. Unsurprisingly, coming from the preeminent military house, Dawn Lords hold command of the Retribution's 3 armies, albeit in conjunction with some of the most senior military warcasters also part of the cause. These warcasters come from all parts of Iosan society, as one would expect, and much like other nations in Amoran. But while Ios has never had any lack of magical talent, with the introduction of the Cortex technology, finding those who display compatibility with the operation of the nation's Myrmidons has been more difficult. Sibyls from the military houses have their methods founded in divination, though they are not uniformly foolproof, since there is a significant overlap in skill and ability with those who would become battle mages, arcanists, or artificers. Nonetheless, all among the Halatir have a reserve of warcasters, though the nation's total number of warcasters is much lower than that of their neighbours and enemies. The Retribution itself has means to find and train warcasters much like the houses, and thus count on several to lead their strike forces. As one would expect, however, their overall lead notwithstanding, the Retribution warcasters find themselves in a strange place as concerns their practical authority alongside the military's officer corps. Luckily, though, as befits the purpose of their organisation, they tend towards leading smaller task groups with specific goals, and so there is little question of command for their operations. Whether or not Myrmidons accompany the Mage Hunters is another matter. Though recently, as Iosan forces have ventured further afield in greater numbers, the Mage Hunter warcasters do tend to have a small convoy of Myrmidons at their disposal. The vast majority of these machines come from 2 houses. House Shail has long had a near monopoly on the design and production of Myrmidons, based on principles that are almost as old as the Iosan people themselves, albeit adapted with Cortex technology. House Vire, on the other hand, is the source of elven innovation in Myrmidon design, though the weaponry that is installed in the Vire Myrmidon armory is of a more brutal sort, using the Vire Arcanist's knowledge of the occult, such as exploiting the barriers between arcane and arcane, to devastating effect. Despite their differences, though, many design concepts remain the same, not least their propulsion, which use arcane condensers to take ambient energies to charge power cells via accumulators within the chassis, which power the turbine propelling the Myrmidon along. Thus, unlike their counterparts, the Myrmidon is a much more self-sustaining and efficient machine in the long run, even though their battlefield and operational endurance suffers when there is no ley line close by to serve as an easy source of recharging energy. It is for this reason that Mage Hunters sometimes conduct their business without a battle group in attendance. Though the retribution of Scyrah's vendetta, and consequently that of almost the whole of the Iosan nation, is primarily against the arcanists of the human world, they have come to be suspicious, at the very least, of the magic of every other race and nation. With the rise of Everblight in the north and remembering the fate of Issyria, coupled with the recovery of Nisor from the Khadorans and the Scorn invasion from the east, it is safer for the elves to view all with suspicion, even their erstwhile Rhulic friends, with whom they have had diplomatic contact since the days of the Empire of Laios. The Rhul folk have the longest continuous history of settled life in Imoran, all of it based in and around their first city of Gord, from whose founding the Rhul number the years. The nation of Rhul is divided into 7 counties, though these tend to be counted separately from their great cities, especially Gord. However, the dwarves that are the Rhul folk of popular memory's imagination share their lands and resources freely and contentedly with the ogrun communities scattered about their nation. The larger and more rustic ogrun typically serve the diminutive dwarves in some reasonable capacity in exchange for board and lodging, though many ogrun do stay amongst their family units as craftsmen or other contributors to their more rural village life. The dwarves are a decidedly more cosmopolitan sort, and thus the two races coexist in a complementary and synergistic way such that most ogrun of Rhul are as much a part of the dwarven clans as the dwarves themselves. Their cosmopolitan nature extends to their human neighbours to the south, and the Rhul are perhaps, as a race, the most integrated and worldly of those in western Imoran, having long held trade agreements with Signar, since before the ink on the Corvus treaties was even dry. In return, the Iron Kingdoms had a ready workforce of dwarves to help in the rebuilding process in the aftermath of the Orgoth occupation. As the longest established nation of western Imoran, the Rhulic people are a deeply traditional folk, and this extends to warfare, with clear distinctions between war amongst themselves and war involving other races. Indeed, clan conflict is rarely considered to be warfare, as there are countless rituals and ancient customs associated with conducting feuds, all of which are overseen by neutral parties from the Moot of the 100 Houses, the highest arbiter of clan justice in Rhul, with authority second only to the collective Stone Lords. These judges from the moots let feuds become violent if needs be, as it is better than the alternative of simmering poor relations among neighbouring clans, but they enforce peace with ruthless efficiency should the skirmishing become too disruptive to commerce operations and the overall prosperity of Rhul. Because of these laws and the passionate nature of younger dwarves, coupled with the innate desire of all clan members to fight on their country's behalf, many go to serve with a Seerforge commission or perform some other mercenary work abroad. This is largely encouraged by the Moot and the Stone Lords, as it ensures a ready and willing army available to the clans, though they pay close attention to trends of mercenary activity outside of Rhul, and willingly veto contracts they feel do not contribute to the betterment of Rhul. The infamous Glomring, a company of dwarven spies and cutthroats, serves as an exception to the generally accepted mercenary trade, who, as such, have an on and off rivalry with Clan Jord, the Moot's designated spy masters. As to the commission itself, founded in response to the Khadoran invasion of Lael, it is the unofficially accepted mercenary organisation of the Moot and Stone Lords, and in effect a substantial part of Rhul's armed forces. Manned in large part by soldiers from the martial clans, such as Great Clan Doug and others who bear the responsibility for guarding the fortresses at Hammerfall, Lakeforge and Horgenhold. The Commission's company's typical duties are what you would expect of mercenaries, though more importantly for its commanders, they serve as escorts to many key trade caravans and convoys, whether of arms, commodities or payments. The companies of the Commission are much like their human counterparts, composed of varying numbers of platoons, which in turn have a few squads in each, led by captains, lieutenants and sergeants, as one might expect. More senior ranks are typically tied to the clan hierarchy, with higher commands held by the clan lords, their champions and ogrun coronet. And while the rank of general is almost mundane in Signar, much like commandant in Khador, a Rhulic general must achieve a great deal before a Stone Lord bestows that rank upon them. Such is the mercenary nature of the Rhulic outfits, it's very possible, and indeed accepted, that both sides in a conflict can end up contracting platoons of dwarves from the same parent company. The Rhulic commanders are savvy enough to ensure that there is little, if any, chance of one dwarf opening fire on another, and postings of platoons and companies are kept as geographically separate as possible. Though it is yet to happen, one should not be surprised that if Rhulic companies on opposing sides encounter each other on the battlefield, they would either abandon the field entirely or gather with their opposite numbers for a friendly chinwag amidst battle to compare contracts and notes on their colleagues. Their adamance at adhering to such standards, along with their strong mercantile heritage, has given Rhulic captains a certain notoriety for driving hard bargains. Away from their homelands they are indeed a united people, much like the elves, but in both why and how the elves and dwarves are almost complete opposites.